Welcome to Unit 5. In this unit, we continue our study of the planning group process as we examine project communications, risk, human resource, and procurement planning. By the end of this week, you will be able to define your approach to managing project communications, distinguish between formal and informal communication methods, and defend when each is applicable on a project. Evaluate and select appropriate communications tools and methods to communicate with identified stakeholders, including commonly used templates for communication activities such as status reporting, issues tracking, change control, and project reviews. You should be able to recognize best practices for project risk management planning and develop a plan to manage the human resources of your project. Let's now take a look at project communications and how to effectively plan for project communications to ensure we are engaged with our stakeholders through the communications processes. The communication plan is usually created by the project manager and/or the project management team in the early stage of the project planning. It is a key component in coordinating and tracking schedules, issues, and action items. The communications plan will become an integral part of your overall project management plan, so you want it to take the time to map out the flow of information to your different stakeholders or stakeholder groups. Project communications management planning process will help us determine who needs what information, when or how often, and in what format to disseminate this information. Through this planning, we should be able to describe who will produce this information and who is responsible for its dissemination. When developing our project communications management plan, we need to determine the various technologies we might use to communicate with stakeholders and if there is a specific format, communication system, or software that needs to be used. You also want to include in your project communications management plan any communications constraints that might exist, such as your policy for confidential or restricted information, protocol for handling this type of information, policies for communicating outside of your project team, stakeholders, or your sponsor. Your communications management plan might even go so far as to include sample forms or templates, as well as the instructions for using them, such as the status reporting, change control, or issues management. The major inputs to the plan communications management process is the project management plan and the stakeholder register. A couple of the tools or techniques you might use include the communications requirements analysis and the communications technology. Of course, the major output to this process is the project communications management plan and any updates to project documents generated from this process. One of our discussion topics in Unit 5 is related to project communications plan development and the components that you would want in a project communications management plan. You should use the knowledge gained from this unit's readings to develop a project communications management plan for your project and post it to the designated discussion forum. Because projects are unique, one-time events, they are inherently risky. There is a level of uncertainty within every project, from the estimated budget and duration to the ability to even complete the project scope of work as required. In the project risk management process, we first have to plan for managing project risks. How do we want to manage our risk activities for our projects? We want to make sure that we provide a level of risk management that is equal to the complexity and level of uncertainty of our project. We would not spend the same time, money, resources, and effort to manage risk for every project. Once we know how we want to approach our risk management for projects, we have to identify risk for each project. This risk identification process should start when you are evaluating projects for selection, and of course at a very high level of analysis. There is also risk identification taking place in the developed charter process. This risk identification process will become much more in-depth as more information about the project becomes available. So just know that project risk identification is not a one-time effort. It is a process that is evident throughout the project lifecycle. There are various risk identification techniques that you may apply to any one project. Some and sometimes you need to use multiple risk identification tools and techniques. Some of the more common risk identification tools and techniques include assumptions analysis, using risk profiles, risk breakdown structures, and just good old-fashioned brainstorming. As risks are identified, there needs to be a thorough risk assessment. We start out by assessing risks using qualitative tools and techniques, and then, if necessary, we move on to quantitative risk analysis or risk assessment. Not every risk will require this level of analysis. The project usually determines this. The output of the risk identification and assessment process is the beginning of the risk register, which includes a list of risks that have been assessed and prioritized for managing. Other risks that are low in priority may be put on a watch list for future monitoring, but not actively monitored at the present time. This prioritization list, or the prioritized list of risks, will require adequate risk response strategies, which may include accepting the risk, avoiding the risk, transferring the risk to a third party, or mitigating the impact of the risk should it occur. Also know that project risk is not always negative. We want to manage our positive risks or opportunities with the same interest as negative risks. We may choose to exploit the opportunity that we identify. We may decide to do nothing to improve the opportunity, or we could even share this opportunity with others to improve the outcome. Now, whether our risks or uncertainties are positive or negative, we need to ensure that all key stakeholders understand the probability of the risk occurring and the level of impact the risk will have on the project, all within the terms of the project objectives of cost, time, and scope or quality. So a risk assessment of medium impact needs to be clearly defined. Medium impact to cost, time, and scope or quality could have three different meanings to three different stakeholders. This assessment scale should be clearly defined in the risk management plan. You can see the PMBOK section probability impacts matrix for more information on probability and impact matrix used in defining the assessment scale. As a result of the risk identification, assessment, and risk response strategy development processes, we should have an adequate understanding of what risk could occur, the probability of occurrence, and the impact that a risk will have on the project should it occur. The risk response strategy will help determine whether we need to provide additional funding to mitigate the impact of a risk event. The contingency reserves are then set aside and incorporated into the project budget in order to successfully manage these risks. The planning processes for managing project human resources begins early in the project as you determine what human resources are needed to complete the project activities identified. The project manager should document the project roles, responsibilities, required skills, the reporting relationships, and develop a staffing management plan to ensure that the right project team members are brought into the project at the right time. A good practice is to include project management team members, the project team members, in developing the project work breakdown structure and early decision making to strengthen their commitment to the project. The key inputs to this process includes the project management plan and the activity resource requirements, that were identified during the developed project charter processes. One of the tools used to illustrate the connection between the work packages identified in the WPS and the human resource requirements is the RACI chart, which identifies resources who will be responsible, accountable, and need to consult or inform. The output of this process includes the human resource management plan and the staffing management plan. The human resource management plan will include the roles and responsibilities, the authority and competency required of the assigned human resources. The staffing management plan describes when and how the project team will be acquired, how long they are needed, and when and how they will be released at the end. Now, this has only been an introduction to these project planning processes for communications, risk, and human resources. Be sure to read through the material recommended in the Unit 5 checklist. We have 2 discussions this week, You are welcome to participate in either or both discussions. In one discussion, you will discuss the risk management planning process and provide your interpretation of a risk management plan. The other is a discussion on communications management planning, where you will have the opportunity to share a project communications management plan for your project. You might also want to work through the Microsoft project exercise and post your updated project schedule to the dedicated discussion forum. As always, there is an end of unit quiz that you must complete in order to move on to the next unit.